Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit podcast. Today, I am chatting with Chris, who I've gotten to know over the internet for about 2 years. I don't think we've met in person just yet, but I look forward to that one day. But I'll let Chris introduce themselves and tell you all about how amazing they are. Hi, Chris.
I I don't know that I could speak to the second part, but I can tell you who I am.
Okay, tell us.
How I got involved is like so many other people by accident. So I got involved in the environmental nonprofit movement when I was 19. That would have been 2002. I just never left. That was also by accident. So I wanted to go into social justice, but just got stuck in environmental. So I currently work at a small environmental nonprofit in Denver, Colorado. I also work for community-centered fundraising as the editor of the Content Hub. And I also work at Next 100 Colorado, which is a movement to increase equity in the outdoors in Colorado. And I also own my own business because need to do all the things, which in that business, it's called the Talbot-Heindel experience. I could do whatever I wanted, and I do. Yeah.
That's awesome in itself. Oh, I also want to draw attention to the comics, and I want to ask a little bit more about them. Do you do them all yourself? Do you do the art as well? That's an insane amount of talent. I don't know how you do that.
Thank you. Actually, my degree is in art, so it's the thing that I do technically. But yeah, I do all of the comics myself. The stories are not all from my life, though. For folks who don't know, I do comics mostly related to life as a non-binary person living in a binary world, and all of the stories come from non-binary individuals, not necessarily from me. But yeah, all the drawings and a lot of the language comes from me. Some of it comes from the people who share their stories with me.
I love that. Oh, I didn't know it was other people's stories as well. We should definitely link those in the show notes, by the way. Those would be great.
Well, thank you.
Chris, I wanted to ask you a little bit about you have such a wide view of the nonprofit sector and of community-centric fundraising and environmental nonprofits, and also with your own business, you're doing a lot. And I'm just wondering, what are some trends that you're seeing in our sector?
I'm sure folks have seen that currently we have like a backlash happening against DEI, and I don't just mean from MAGA hat wearing folks who are never on board to begin with, but also we're seeing it so-called white liberals, which is very disheartening. That has been the thing that I'm seeing the most of, and what I'm experiencing in a couple of my jobs is a lot of backlash. Since summer of 2020, there's just been this very extractive nature of white folks in environmental nonprofits, especially. I don't know if it's just like the nonprofits I've worked at, but it seems like environmental nonprofits are notoriously white and definitely white led. Until summer of 2020, most of them believed that social justice issues were beyond their scope, and they would call it mission if anything related would even come into play. And I guess I should rewind a little bit too and say that I don't do DEI because I think it emphasizes the wrong thing. DEI, for folks who don't know, is diversity, equity, inclusion. But I think it's in the wrong order, and I think it's missing justice. So I like to say JEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. So if you don't have justice, you're very performative because justice requires action. So you have to overcome injustice, not just remark that it's there and pull a few BIPOC or gender variant or disabled folks through the glass ceiling. So I focus on JEDI rather than DEI. There are a lot of organizations that got on board during 2020. They're all about not even the E, they're about diversity and inclusion, and they ignored the justice, they ignored the equity, if they do anything at all. And so with these organizations, it's like pulling teeth. So I'm sure every like DEI specialist has heard it's not the right time. That's a constant thing. Oh, we hear you, but it's really not the right time for that. Or these folks aren't ready for that. And a friend of mine who's also in the DEI space specifically said she suggested asking them point blank to define the right time, to describe it, describe how you know it's the right time, mostly so they can hear themselves, but also so that what conditions you need to work toward if there is a legitimate right time for them, which there probably isn't. They're going to try and move those goalposts. You have to try and not let them. But there's that comes into play all the time in the daily. There's the accepted idea that we have to meet people where they're at while never requiring them to be anywhere. If you don't require them to be anywhere and you constantly tell people of color to meet those people where they're at, it's going to be at racism 101 or remediary racism 101. It's never going to be like to the actions portion. And so we just continually exhaust ourselves trying to bring white people up to speed who aren't engaging enough to do their own learning outside of what you're hand feeding them. And we run ourselves ragged and never get to transformative changes. Studies have shown it takes years off BIPOC folks' lives. It's not the most terrible thing that they're doing, but it's the most common thing that they're doing. Another thing I would say that happens a lot is the need to cater to white fragility and wordsmith continually to make white folks and others who have internalized white supremacy culture comfortable. So I don't want to just rag on white folks because it's not just them, it's other folks who have also internalized that white supremacy culture and don't see a need to dismantle it. Mostly folks who generally benefit from it. So what happens is we create a term, it becomes popular, then it gets politicized, and then white supremacists go after it. And instead of just being like, okay, white supremacists were never allowed, but they're with us anyway, we then wordsmith that word and are like, oh, we can't use this anymore. We have to come up with something else. And it's a distraction. And it makes us continually in this cycle of re-wordsmithing rather than re-wordsmithing around white comfort, rather than moving forward with the word that was never wrong in the first place. Like words are just meant to describe something. It accurately did that. Let's just use it. So, yeah. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, I think that was perfect. It actually made me think of this piece, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which I'm sure you've
Mhm,
read, but it's just so many manners and ways where like racialized people, the onus is always put on you, or even like disabled people, the onus is put on
mhm.
people. Don't usually go out of their way to educate themselves, which is so painful. And in this piece, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, they have a quote of, I can no longer engage with the gulf of an emotional disconnect that white people display when a person of color articulates their experience.
Mhm.
And I think that's just so real and so powerful. And I see it all the time. Like, I sent you that post of the hospital doing that fiesta fundraiser, and that post has 40 something likes, 46 likes, but it has over 15,000 impressions. People see it, they know that
Mhm,
it's wrong, but
mhm.
to cater to power, to white supremacy, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm gonna not risk my reputation. I'm not gonna stir the pot, anything like that. But then the onus is then put on the racialized person, the disabled
Yeah.
person, neurodivergent person to then stand up for themselves because nobody else will. Those people who don't get it or don't care are not going to do it. I don't know. That's just one of the big problems I have with like white liberals. Like it's just very trendy to be anti-racist, but they don't actually even know what that means and don't put in the
Yeah.
work.
Part of it is I think that we don't require commitments, just vibes all the time. And if we do have commitments, there's no accountability. We don't require DEI training. It's not mandatory. Or if it is mandatory, it's milquetoast, like really pathetic training. Part of it is that we're not doing it right. And I think that's part of the crux of the matter is because it wasn't safe to do things in a more liberatory way, we developed these systems that are just, I don't know how to describe it. Well, I'll use a example of something outside that hopefully relates and not just in my head. Like when I look at environmental laws, they're in place to stop the worst of the worst from happening, not making things better, but just stopping the worst of the worst. And there's this constant race to the bottom where organizations or companies or individuals will do the bare minimum to scrape by those environmental laws, which does so much damage. But because they followed the really pathetic laws, they're like, oh, we're good. And that's what we've done in this space as well. We've created the very bottom line. And we're like, we can't go below this line. So just do this tiny bit of education to stay above it. But then we have no accountability. So people constantly go below the line as well. And it's just,
Wait, where do you think the line is for people? Because for me, like where I see people, you can't go past that line is like blatant racism. Like nothing before that, nothing that's still very aggressive and oppressive and horrible, but blatant, a slur or something like that. That's the line that I see. So I don't know if you see it a little bit higher than that for the people that you've been working with, or if that's like there as well.
I see it below that
Oh
because
yeah.
I've had slurs. And even that doesn't get disrupted. I have to disrupt it myself, even if the slur is against me. And then I usually get called in for the way in which I said what I said. And I, to me, the bar is in hell somewhere. Like, or there is no bar. Maybe there is no bar. Like we have the bar that's being taught, which I think is very much like kumbaya if we don't acknowledge things they didn't happen and we're all equal unless we do something horrible. But the real bar is somewhere in hell because we're not holding anyone accountable.
Yeah, it's you should just be happy with kind of the scraps
Yeah.
and like why can't we just all get along? Everything's so political. Like why are you making it
Mhm.
political? But there's no actual acknowledgement or action taken to repair the harm or work towards justice,
Yeah.
which is then you have very surface level of peace. Like you don't
Yeah.
actually have justice and it's just peace is maintained for this group of people by everybody else swallowing everything that they're going through and
Yes.
not doing anything about it.
Yes. And I feel like the second that BIPOC, gender variant, disabled folks, anyone who doesn't fit the supremacist culture that we live in, like actually addresses something, they become a problem, which is nothing new. But with all this education that we've done since summer of 2020, you'd think it would be like, oh, I recognize that as like a form of white supremacy showing up, and maybe I should disrupt that. But that doesn't happen. An example that I recently saw was a friend of mine who was a leader at an organization, queer BIPOC, was driven out of the organization by white women, white cis women. And the accusations against this person were like, they're too loud. And it's like, hmm, where have I heard that before? Every BIPOC person has been told they're too loud. And a lot of it is just cultural. But then some of it is if you speak out against anything, you're too loud. This person was called racist for saying that rich white cis people sucked. And it's like, where's the lie though? Come on. Okay, but specifically they said white cis, powerful white cis people who use their power in a certain way sucked. So totally true. And then the third thing was they were accused of inappropriate behavior for saying that someone looked nice.
At that point, you know that they're going to come after you for anything.
Yes. And then you have to sit back and think this person is a queer BIPOC individual. How much bullshit did they experience at this job that they gave grace to, that they gave a free education to, that they ignored because it didn't impact the larger organization. And they're like, oh, I'm just going to swallow this harm and carry on because we all do it. Everyone who lives at an intersection has done it and they know what I'm talking about. So, how many times did this person do that in that role? And then there's these three things, two of which I would say are completely cultural, if that was the true problem. But you only had the white staff saying so, the white board members doing like deep dives, hiring a white led organization to do that deep dive. And they came out with the conclusion that out of there. Okay. If those things were actually a problem, why wouldn't there, like, this is the first time this person's heard of that issue. It was never brought to their attention ever. Why wouldn't you spend 2 seconds to call that person in and be like, this is a problem for me. Can we amend our working relationship in this way? The white led like contractors that did the deep dive, why did they come through with educational materials on whatever they thought needed to be done? Because they don't do that ever. White people get the benefit of the doubt forever. They get grace forever. They get to say all kinds of racist shit, like slurs and everything, forever. And it's constantly, oh, they're listening and learning. They're trying. They're going to be like, they're going to learn. Don't you worry. Just be patient. And the second a BIPOC individual does anything that could just be cultural, it could be like cultural mishmash, right? Like it's not meshing with white woman culture somehow. There's no education provided. It's automatically you're out of here. And it's all the time. It's what I'm experiencing at my workplace. I can't tell you how many blatantly racist things I've had to swallow. And I've explained to them what they are. And I've gotten an apology for one. It was conditional because a lot of times they are, right? I'm sorry if, and then, but I don't remember, blah, 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 whatever. That's not an apology. It's not accountability, but I swallowed it because it's like, it's better than nothing, which is what I've gotten for the last 8.5 years. So, like, the amount of education I've had to do and the amount of grace I've had to give. And then I wore a keffiyeh at a meeting, and this coworker just went on an unhinged anti-Arab racist rant at me and has weaponized his feelings ever since. And this was December 18th. This happened. So we're at month 5 now of this weaponization. And like the ultimate goal, it seems, is to drive me out of the organization. If they can't fire you, they will drive you out. So there's very separate worlds that we live, even at working at the same organization.
One of the things that kills me is not only am I forced to do all this education, like now, this is a form of education for an audience that is mostly white,
Mm.
but I'm forced to do this education because you won't educate yourself. And
Yeah.
obviously, that's everybody listening, blah, 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 disclaimer. But no, there's one of them that's going to be like, not me. Anyways, but then I
Yeah.
also have to provide proof. You
Mm-hmm.
know, my lived expertise and experience like is not enough to tell you like, hey, that's racist. Stop doing that. But it's, oh, when you're saying like white people always get the benefit of the doubt forever, no matter what, I thought of 4 different examples immediately because I know there's someone listening who's, yeah, who, when? That's not true. I've seen white people get in trouble. And it's like,
For how
yep,
long?
yeah,
For how long? They
come
might
on.
get in immediate trouble, but it's going to be forgiven eventually. Like even Amy Cooper, like she had immediate trouble, and then blammo, like forgiven, even though she never took accountability. So Amy Cooper was,
Walking her dog.
yeah, with no leash on in a very environmentally delicate space for birds. And Chris Cooper, who is a bird watcher, was in that same area and asked her to put her dog on a leash. And Chris Cooper is a Black man. And she immediately weaponized her whiteness and white womanhood specifically and threatened to call the cops and say that he was attacking her. And then she did it. And she got increasingly hysterical on the phone to the cops, which we all know could be a death sentence for a Black man when a white woman is doing that. It was very serious, and bless Chris Cooper because he had more patience and grace than I ever would. And he forgave her early on and said that he didn't think that she should be getting as much.
Backlash.
Yeah, yeah, backlash. I was gonna say consequences. She got consequences for her action, but like
It's consequences.
yeah,
Exactly. Like, you deserve that.
yeah, because you're
Like
not
that.
safe. You're not
100%.
a safe person. And if you are in a position of power and you're not a safe person for an entire demographic of other people, then you shouldn't be in that position. So it's really consequences. And the fact that she never once took accountability is, yeah, extra shit on that shit pile. you know?
And that goes back to the proof, right? He needed that
Mhm.
video. Who's gonna believe
Yeah,
you? That sounds
yeah,
wild. And screenshots and saving these emails and saving as many receipts because you know that they're not gonna believe you.
yeah,
But this is something that they definitely get when it's like when a white woman is in a situation where it's a man who's like sexually harassing her. They get it. They save the screenshots. They know that other people might not understand their lived experience. They videos,
mhm,
audio, everything. But I don't know, just something does not translate
yeah.
to the empathy or understanding doesn't translate in some of these cases, and it's just really annoying.
So in the end, no lasting consequences. There's no lasting consequences for people when they punch down, basically, or
Yeah,
in other ways are horribly bigoted. I've never seen it
like you're perceived to have more power. It's fine if you punch down.
anywhere. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then speaking of power, I wanted to make sure to say this part. So I've been watching or trying to like decipher what it is about what's happening in this current moment. So we see like so white folks, I think, see power with or power to as power over. They don't decipher between the three. So they always see any power whatsoever as power over. I'm going to control you with this power that I have. They saw that since summer 2020, BIPOC folks are finally being listened to, and in some places giving pedestals in which to speak. But this was like reparations in a way from being ignored or pushed to margins or shamed into silence. So this was power to or power with. But they saw it as just power, and so they saw it as power over. So when they had the opportunity to use their own intersections of marginalization, they used it as power over. So in Amy Cooper's case, it would be womanhood is for marginalization. So she's using womanhood as power over Chris Cooper for deigning to remind her to put her dog on a leash in an area where it's required, right? You see my coworker who's Jewish using his Jewishness as power over to try and get me first to be disbelieved by my other coworkers, shamed, removed from the JEDI committee, and then trying to force me out, right? You see the white woman weaponizing her womanhood against a gay BIPOC individual and getting him removed from his position. So it's how white folks use power. They always use power over and over each other and over us. And so I think that's what's happening in this moment is because people didn't understand what was actually happening with the movement and with Jedi efforts, they saw the power to and the power with as power over. And when they saw that they could take that power, they did. And so I think that's another reason why we fucked up how we've taught um, Jedi principles. Like the people haven't developed discernment. They haven't developed a lens. So Jedi isn't meant to be like, here's a checklist of things that you do, and here's a checklist of things that you don't do. It's a lens through which you see your work. And just like at an environmental organization, you would put like anything you're doing through a lawyer's lens, through a biological lens, through a something else lens, you would add that JEDI lens, right? So it'd be another thing that you would check to make sure that your work was abiding by all of the rules. But it's a lens, it's a way of looking at things. So for folks who are just watching this happen, they're not seeing that because they're like, oh, but that person's marginalized too. Who do I listen to? Who's right? I'm supposed to listen to the most marginalized. Who is that? It's because they haven't developed discernment. They're not looking through an equity lens. They're just saying, I don't know what to do. That person's marginalized. That person's marginalized. I don't know what to do here. I think there's that happening as well. I do want to say, though, I feel like I want to say that I understand. I don't understand Amy Cooper. I don't understand this white lady that pushed someone I know out of their organization. I do understand that Jewish folks right now, white Jewish folks in my purview, are reacting from a trauma response. And I want to recognize that because it is real. It is important to acknowledge they're in a trauma state. And rather than being thoughtful, we all are when we're in a trauma state, we get reactive and we let the fear center of our brains take over. And we can't really have rational thought at that point. But I want to say also that it's really important and it's everyone's responsibility to emotionally regulate. So, like BIPOC folks know to do this because we've had to do it our whole lives. Because when we react out of a fear response or emotional response or a rational response, there are consequences immediately. We're not allowed that grace to be that reactive. And if you emotionally regulate, as BIPOC folks have done our entire lives, and it's a skill you can learn. It's not easy to learn, but it's a skill you can learn. You can really hear what's being said instead of reacting with violence, whether it's power violence, verbal violence, or physical violence, or using the cops as violence. And you can understand that what a fear means rather than reacting through fear. So, yeah, I want to say I understand where it's coming from, but it's also all of our responsibilities to emotionally regulate through fear responses.
Another type of violence that I see a lot in our sector
Mhm,
is I'm going to call your board member. I'm going to call your major donor.
mhm.
They're the police. So I'm thinking of
Yeah.
like, this is one of the reasons why I got into consulting because the people who get what I'm about, they come find me and we work together beautifully. They're such amazing executive directors that I get to work with. And the people who are like, I'm going to call your board chair and tell them that you support anti-racism or what I think is radical about me, which is so basic.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about that, which I think is really empowering. But it just reminds me of how stifled I felt, like, in-house, not being able to call things out that were completely horrible
Yeah.
or being able to do so only because I held the power of being a fundraiser. Like, I hold the money. Are you gonna fire me and shoot yourself on the foot? Like, they also had to do some risk assessment, but it was just it's hard that they don't get to hear these conversations, and yeah, thank you for coming on and, like, sharing your thoughts because I think people need to tune in a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think that we've forgotten the goals. So the goals is obviously like collective liberation. Like our collective mission is collective liberation, no matter what part of the nonprofit industrial complex we actually work in. It's all collective liberation. And we've lost sight of that. And you can't do collective liberation if you're not a collective, right? So JEDI has to be at the forefront. It can't be something you add on. It can't be something that's an afterthought. It's that lens that I was talking about. We need transformational change. And the only way you're going to do that is through really living JEDI principles and having it at the forefront, having that lens.
There's people who
Yeah.
are out here working with our communities who don't know anything about how we talk, how we act, how we communicate. Even when you were talking about that queer person giving someone a compliment, that's very normal in
Mhm.
the queer community.
Yeah.
We're very friendly.
Yeah.
So it's just like that cultural competency that comes with actually understanding DI and having that Jedi lens.
Mhm.
So helpful.
Yeah. This is like the crux of the problem as well, is that we continuously do our Jedi work in isolation. We'll say, oh, do your own work. And we don't mean that do your own work by yourself, because why would you? Like, you can do better together. Like, I don't think working in isolation is working for anyone. It doesn't motivate us to work together. And I don't think that it helps us learn the skills. If we want to dismantle that shame, we need to come together. Make your learning a community activity. Learn mutual support and foster a sense of unity and solidarity together. Build meaningful relationships with each other so you can call each other in. And so you can get used to being called in without feeling that shame. If you build rapport with each other and you actually practice calling in, that other person receives that education of how to be called in and how to react in a safe space. Yeah, do all that, practice collective responsibility and accountability, learn conflict resolution and reconciliation in your group, and get to the point of radical honesty with that group so you can do minimal honesty with all the other people in your life. If you practice in a small microcosm, you can bring those learnings to the macrocosm and you can be all the better for it. I think when people say, here, do your own work, they think, I got to read all these like books. But what if one person in your group read a book, another person did, and you shared those learnings? What if you practiced all these like practices together in a safer space? That would be like incredibly helpful. So that's my last plug is don't do this work alone, do it together. Like all us BIPOC folks, we're doing it together all the time. We always have these little groups where we learn together, where we share learnings, where we talk about ways we've been harmed and ways that we've called in other people that worked, things that didn't work. We support each other all the time. And I want white folks and folks that don't have that kind of community to do that as well, because it makes the work so much easier and it does help you practice those skills.
That's actually exactly how I got started on my kind of journey of learning and unlearning because two people I greatly respected and thought were totally normal reacted to this thing that I thought was okay, like white people wearing dreads in such a large way that I was like, wait, but I deeply respect these people. So there's something that I'm missing. And then that led me into educating myself. And that was almost 10 years ago, but it was someone calling me in. So I love the very actionable tips that you just shared. And I think, yeah, we're stronger together as a community.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that, and I'm gonna bring something else totally into it because that's what I do. But I'm also in adults. What is it? Oh, I just adult children from alcoholic and dysfunctional families anonymous, and like that has changed my view of like how much healing can come from learning together as well. We're all harmed by white supremacy culture in ways that we will probably never know. So when you come together with other people who are experiencing the same thing, not only do you learn how to like notice things or call yourself in, because a lot of adult ACA is the acronym. A lot of the ACA stuff that I learned is how to stop punishing myself for things that are out of my control. So you learn these things together, you practice things together, you heal together. And just like the act of being in community means that I'm going to be continually in that community. I'm going to keep coming back. If I was doing this in isolation, this network in isolation, I would have burnt out like a long time ago. But I'm coming up on my 1 year anniversary in this group, and it's because I'm doing it in community. So I think this is like excellent advice for no matter what you're dealing with, do it in community.
Okay. Now, do you want to tell us where we can find
Oh,
you?
sorry. So I'm on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Chris Talbot-Heindel. And then my website is talbot-heindel.com. And then I'm Talbot_Heindel on Twitter and Instagram.
Love it. Thank you everyone for tuning to today's episode of the Small Nonprofit. I love what Chris said about communities. Go find your people. Go make sure that you are doing your learning and unlearning in a space that feels safe and that pushes you to do better. We can't be scraping the bottom of the barrel anymore. And we're really counting on you to take that learning upon yourself. But that's it for today. We'll chat with you next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.